We've covered extensively colony collapse disorder and this mysterious die-off of the honeybee population. Well, it has just been reported that a major breakthrough in the efforts to genetically modify honeybees has been reported. Scientists were able to create a honeybee that contained a foreign gene. In this case, it was one that made some of the cells in the honeybee glow. Now, this is a first in bee research. We have seen them, they've been able to make glowing kittens and glowing pigs. Now, the researchers weren't able to establish a colony of genetically modified bees, but they only showed that genetically manipulated queens could produce genetically modified drones in the lab. So basically, it was proof that their concept could work further. So, of course, a dwindling bee population is going to be devastating for the future of mankind. If there are no bees, there is no pollination, and of course, the food supply will suffer. And this is kind of what's created this whole problem. The genetically modified crops could be adding to the die-off of the honeybees. But today, I'm going to be speaking with Marcus Hill. He is an apiculturist and a research scientist, and we're going to be talking about just what these genetically modified bees could mean for a dying bee population. So, Marcus, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Leanne.
So you've been an apiculturist and a researcher a little over 8 years now. What have you been noticing with the bee populations?
Well, there's been a lot of reports of colony collapse disorder and things like that, a lot of invasive species from all over the planet, everything from varroa mites to small hive beetles, and of course all the attendant diseases that come along from industrial-sized agriculture. When you have a mass influx of colonies, say, pollinating almond orchards, and then those colonies are then spread across from Northern California across the country, taking those pests and diseases with them, it's created quite an issue for honeybee operations on large and small scales, as well as feral populations. Everything from pesticide exposure to cell phone radiation exposure to just, like I said, invasive species to just the natural deterioration of the bee as it's overworked and on an industrial scale all play a part in what's called colony collapse disorder at this point.
Right, and because this is now, I guess, such a huge issue, scientists are now kind of developing ways to genetically modify the bees so that they can manufacture their consent into their, newly adapt into their environment. What do you think about these new GM bees?
Well, it's been a long time in the works. Since the genome of the honeybee was mapped in 2006, there's been a problem in having the transgenic qualities express themselves in the germ-line stem cells of the honeybee itself. So what these researchers did, Christina Schultz et al., were able to piggyback the gene expression, basically a phosphorescence in this case, and inject that with some modified RNA into a fertilized egg. That fertilized egg was then placed in, and this has happened with many replicates, they got about a 20% success rate, I think. That fertilized egg was placed in a queenless colony, and so the worker bees in there fed that developing larva exclusively royal jelly, which allowed that fertilized egg to develop into a queen bee. That queen bee then was induced to lay unfertilized eggs because it had not been mated, so it could only lay unfertilized eggs. But those drones then had that genetic expression, the glow in the dark quality, and presumably, well, not presumably, they were able to carry that through their semen into the next generation, thereby opening up essentially Pandora's box in the sense that these transgenic expressions can be created throughout the reproductive process, meaning that as these virgin queens go out and get mated, if they're mated with a transgenic drone, they're going to have that transgenic sequence in themselves, pass it on to their progeny, etc. So it's kind of like cracking the dam as well as cracking the code,
Right, exactly. I guess that was my concern, is what happens if these bees are then begin mating with just your average honeybee? There's no turning back.
Exactly. And one of the interesting things in the abstract that's available online for this research study experiment was that the average beekeeper should be able to employ these methods and create their own transgenic lines. But of course, as honeybees are naturally mated in a lot of cases, those genetics, whatever they decide to put in, wherever, will find its way into the overall structure eventually, and God knows what mutations will result from those.
Right, exactly. And so obviously they're not trying to make phosphorescent bees. What do you think, what sort of science are they trying to come up with here? What do you think would be a valuable additive for the bees?
Well, in a lot of respects, they're looking into improving their immune systems. In nature, a honeybee's immunology is dependent a lot on propolis, which is tree sap. So they bring in this tree sap, which is antimicrobial, antiviral, antifungal, and they coat their inner hive with it. Modern industrial beekeeping tries to phase out that propolis because it's very difficult for beekeepers to crack through it all as they're managing all these hives. And so that has played a part in weakening immune system as well as the pesticides, et cetera. So they're trying to figure out ways to bolster a honeybee's immune system. And it sounds well and good, too. It opens up a great opportunity to understand better the biology of the honeybee, of social insects, of haploid, diploid insects. And the world of possibilities is, well, it's a brave new world of possibilities, I guess we should say.
Right. Well, we're hearing now they've got, genetically modified bananas that they're going to start feeding to some African populations that are vitamin A deficient. And so they're going to now have these bananas that have vitamin A. But we've also been hearing a lot how they're hoping to have vaccines implanted in these bananas so that they can just, the kid can eat a banana and become vaccinated. Is this some technology that we can see them using in the future with bees, where bees can pollinate the plants and it'll already sort of pollinate it with whatever it is they're hoping to improve our health with?
Well, I don't know if the bees themselves could pass on some type of vaccine, but if the plants obviously have that built in, they will cross-pollinate with others and propagate that genetic line within the plants, of course. Along with GMOs, the first genetically modified organism, or plant rather, was the tobacco plant back in 1982, and that was to affect the tobacco plant's immunology as well. And now recently they've found the tobacco ring spot virus replicating in honeybees. I know InfoWars carried a story on that as well a while back, but it's really kind of scary in a lot of respects because they don't know what's going to happen as a result of putting a vaccine in a banana or or a phosphorescence in a drone. It doesn't really. You can't map out those kind of effects. So.
Right, exactly. And honeybees are, the perfect God expression, really. But I guess my concern here is that we see a lot about, Monsanto or these other companies patenting their seeds. Well, what happens if they now create these genetically modified bees and then, they cross-pollinate, they procreate with other bees, and then all of a sudden, now are the bees patented? How do we control that?
Exactly. That's a big concern, of mine as well. Where do the property rights of the beekeeper come into play? If those genetic expressions wind up in somebody's bee that they've spent generation after generation trying to breed in a certain way for certain traits, what happens then? And where are the quote-unquote natural beekeepers, those who wouldn't use a transgenic strain? Where do their rights come into play? So it's going to be a lot of interesting questions and a lot of debate in the future, and I encourage everyone to be very, very vocal in that debate.
Well, exactly, because here we have, some countries or states that are saying, we don't want genetically modified crops in our countries and in our states, but here, this is something that they can't really control, where the bees are going to go, where they're going to pollinate. There is no way to control the spread of that. That's their job. That's what they do. So what next?
Exactly. And in this particular case with this transgenic drone, they didn't create a full colony of bees, but like I said, that germline stem cell furtherance of those genetic traits is now a very viable reality for just about anyone who wants to pursue it. So
right. It was a giant leap forward in their testing. I mean, they've been working to try and see if they could actually do this, and now they've been able to. So that's the next step, is to see if they can actually create a colony.
Right.
What other sort of improvements? Well, so what can people do to learn more about natural beekeeping and, kind of stay in touch with you?
Well, feel free to email me at hillshoneybees@hotmail.com. It's HILLS honeybees@hotmail.com. I don't currently have a website. I'm kind of busy as I possibly can be in the springtime with honeybees and research and all of that, but I look forward to reading any emails and would be happy to provide any expertise or knowledge that I can, or hopefully steer people in the right direction. Try to get involved with your own local beekeepers associations. Talk to them about your concerns. A lot of them may not be aware that this type of research and this breakthrough has come about. So, like I said, just be vocal and keep researching yourselves.
Absolutely. And don't destroy any bee colonies that you might find hiding in your walls.
Please, yes, call a beekeeper. They'd be happy to come and get them, probably for free. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much for bringing this story to our attention.
Oh, no problem,
Appreciate it,
Leanne.
Marcus.
Thank you. Thank you.